did you connect with Jim Fanning? Let's start that story.
Well, that started long before I got to Montreal. So, thanks to my good friend Russ Diethrick, who gave me my first job in baseball, working as a groundskeeper at which was then College Stadium, now Diethrick Park, while I was still in college. I'll never forget the excitement that I felt when I was able to go to work at the stadium, working on the field. And I'll never forget, the first day Jim Fanning came to the ballpark. I mean, this man for me was larger than life. And I can remember how much I just wanted to be around him. I wanted to learn from him. I wanted to get to know him. And he was such a gracious man that as time moved along, he was always willing to spend time with me, answer any questions that I might have, or take me aside to say, okay, this is how you should probably think about doing this or doing that. I mean, he was a wonderful mentor. And even to this day, when I'm faced with difficult or awkward moments, I'll always think to myself, what would Jim do, or what would Jim have done in this situation? Because he was such a great example to learn from, not only as a baseball man, but as a man. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know, right, Frank? He's meant so much to me in my career. And even though the time that I spent working around or with Jim was, I would say probably now about 5 or 6 years, the impact that he had on me as a person and as a baseball executive, it's been with me every step, every day, and will do so while I'm alive. I just can't say enough wonderful things about Jim and the man that he was and what he meant to me.
Can I dig in just a little bit before Russ talks? When you met him, what was your role and what was his role?
Back then, Jim was he was either the vice president of player development or the director of player development. And I was the groundskeeper at the stadium. Tom Kastler and I were sharing duties, working on the field. And then after I graduated from college, there was an opening in the office to work with Pat Morrell, who was then the general manager. And of course, it was only a 2-person office at the time, and Brian Mazurek, who was there working with Pat, decided to go on to different things, and they had an opening, and so I was able to be offered a position and go to work. Actually, what had happened was, it was at the winter meetings in 1979 in Toronto. I was a senior in college, and I went to the winter meetings, my first one, just wanting to walk into the lobby and see whom I might be able to meet in the game. And it was there I had another conversation with Jim about the Jamestown Expos, and it wasn't too long after that, when the position opened, that they had offered me the opportunity. And then it was a year later when Pat retired and the general manager's job became available, and Jim had offered me the general manager's job, and the rest is history from there.
And just at that time, the Montreal Expos actually owned the franchise. It wasn't simply part of an affiliate relationship.
That's right. Montreal owned the franchise. So what made that work especially well, one was I had a great assistant my first year as a general manager, Scott Kinberg, and we spent some. He could tell you some stories about what it was like in our office, and we made it work. We managed, and I see Russ is laughing, and he knows what I'm talking about. But it worked out really well because the franchise here was owned by Montreal. I was employed by the Major League Club, which really made a world of difference. relative to how well they knew the work that I could do. But the other thing was, while I was the general manager here, they also then had employed me as the assistant spring training coordinator down in West Palm Beach. So I was able to spend the season working in Jamestown and then working at spring training down in West Palm. So for 10, 11 months out of the year, at the early stages of my career, I was employed by the Major League Club, and that really made a huge, huge difference. Huge difference.
So then you kind of coordinated, work glove in hand with Jim's operation, the Expo operation, and then from there you go in a different direction. How did you stay in touch with Jim? Was it just sort of through a friendship line?
I'd see whether it would be the winter meetings or down in Florida when he was he would be either scouting or if he was still in his developmental role. We always seemed to cross paths, or whether it be a phone call or whether it be a visit in person. But there was a connection there that, even though I may have gone a long period of time without having any conversation with Jim, that his impact on me was with me every day.
Your relationship with Russ Diethrick, talk about that.
He is really the guy that's responsible for me being where I am today, because I don't think if he hadn't hired me to work on the field that summer, I don't know that any of this would have happened. And he's meant so much to me, and I've been so fond of Russ and have so much respect and admiration. And I knew very early on when I had gone to see him that I was so hopeful that I could work for somebody like Russ, and it was just a huge feather in my cap to be able to say that not only did I work for Russ, but he's a man that I've had so much respect for, and if it wasn't for Russ, I don't think I'd be here today.
No. Were you a rat around the ballpark before then? Did you go to the games before you got interested in sort of working there?
I didn't go to a lot of games, but I was, those who know me best know, I was a sports fanatic growing up. Was a Yankee fan, a Browns fan, still am, a Lakers fan, a Sabres fan. I just grew up loving sports, and when I was very young, whether it was, I probably started in junior high school, I would write letters to coaches or managers, like any foolhardy little kid would do, about, hey, I think you should try this play, try that play. And of course I never got an answer back from anybody, but I just had a love of sports that was in me from a very young age. And actually, even thinking about working for a club was probably a pipe dream for a long time, because you just didn't think along those terms, like it's something that you could actually do, until Bruce Turner, who was then the assistant AD at JCC, I'd gone to JCC before I went to Brockport, who came up to me one day and he said, you've got this crazy interest in sports, and have you ever thought about doing anything with it? And I was like, well, I'm not sure. I don't know what I really could do. And he said, this is what I think you need to do. And he said, I'd like to see you take a look at Brockport. They've got a sport management program. That's where I had gone to school, and kind of let me show you the way. But I think that's what you need to think about doing, and that's exactly what I did. And so Bruce also has had a very big hand in what's happened.
I can remember some of those things you're talking about, Dan. When Mr. Fanning was in town, I think about the first or second time when the team was here, and the comments, and after a session or two at the stadium, some gaming activities, we went out at night dinner to the one that's up on 4th Street.
Ironstone?
Ironstone for dinner that night, and you and the others, and he was there, came along. And he asked me, and he says, "Miss Lunetta, who's this Lunetta kid? What's this Lunetta kid doing?" I said, "Well, you know, a young man in the community is interested. I knew of his background and skill and his ability, and he had an opportunity to come and work with the department, and the assignment was the grounds crew at the stadium." And he says, "The grounds crew?" He said, "No, ground crews are very important. They're a major, major part of the game of baseball." He says, "But not that young man." He says, "He's on his way to the major leagues." He says, "I've got eyes and I've got feelings and I've got desires that wrap around that young man. So if you have to go get another grounds crew member, don't get mad at me." And a lot of it went on from there. And he thought so much about groundkeepers. You talk about Mr. Castor. Mr. Castor had the opportunity to go to Montreal at spring training and at the major league level to move dirt around and redesign the infields and everything. So it meant a lot to him, and it all happened down at the stadium. And I asked you where the stones are that you used to put on their second, or somebody put on their second base today, but you don't find them.
Yeah.
I used to have to go out in the parking lot and get stones and scatter them in the infield, and I could ask Castor. I said, "Geez, what's those stones doing out there?" And pretty soon he said, "No, they're in the groundskeepers." And he says, "I picked them up." So we had that kind of thing. So
I remember those stones well.
it was you and your effort and your ability and your personality that it happened, and so pleased and proud that it happened in Jamestown.
Thank you. Me too.
And the great things can happen there. And I can remember you talking the other day, Mr. Fanning, about and why you're going to fit so best. And I don't know whether they've told you that or yet, or I don't know if they told our field manager. He says, when you were speaking French, do you know that he told you there's no salary for that position? You didn't know that. And you were talking, and I hope they explained it to you, when you were talking about your ability of chasing roofs and making roofs available, getting up in high heights on ladders and stuff. I was going to say that to Steve, but I didn't realize, I didn't want to do that, but I have a responsibility, I guess. Those light towers are the original light towers, and there's a ladder that goes up them. And they changed the bulbs on the top by putting them in a sack and going up the ladder and changing the light bulb. And they've made a new assignment. It's not Austin Schaefer any longer. It's the general manager of the ball club that climbs that ladder and puts in the new light bulb. So we're so glad that you have experience working at heights.
Are you going to hold the ladder, Russ?
I'll hold the ladder, yes.
All right, Russ, I am reading from this book, Across the Seams, and it said, talked about John McHale. This is 1967. 1967, John McHale is now the president of the Atlanta Braves. Took a liking to a former Chicago Cubs backup catcher named Jim Fanning and appointed him director of minor league operations. McHale suggested to Fanning that they consider fielding a team in Jamestown. Fanning contacted Diethrick, and the two began a long working relationship. And that was the beginning of affiliated relationship as early as 1967. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, we were without, the functionings of a minor league operation at the time in Jamestown, and the relationship with Mr. Fanning and the others, as you talk about in Atlanta. You remember Atlanta Braves were here. In fact, Harry Dorsch, the great Atlanta Brave pitcher, was the manager, and we had a great season, and they got us back in baseball. And it got us on the minds and the lips of Jim Fanning. And when anybody in baseball heard that, you didn't have to go out and explain. You didn't have to go out and say a lot of things, because it was very credible what he had to say and what his thoughts were. And having him as a friend and a supporter of the program is why we're here today. And it was all of that kept baseball alive in the town. Greg has put together this group. We talk about the Jamestown, the community baseball program, and you guys and others have stepped forward. I remember there was a time when they came to us and said, "Oh, the team is not going to work." And at the end of the season, I think it was about $48,000 in debt, and it was the paying the umpires. Balls had to be paid for from the previous year, motels, travel, and all that thing. But there was a group of other people like stepped forward this year, stepped forward then. and they formed an organization. So when you bought a season ticket, I can't remember exactly, it was a little over $100, you were asked to donate another $100 to the organization. So after a couple of years, we were able to, and thanks to some of the business people and the bankers in town, there were 3 guys that could go at the end of the season and sign a note to pay the bills. And by using that $100 that we gathered for the last couple of years, we paid off that $48,000 debt dollar for dollar. We didn't settle for 50 cents on the dollar. And all of that happened because of Mr. Fanning, his interest and understanding in baseball in Jamestown and the league, working with McNamara, who was president of the NYP League, and working with a lot of good baseball people that we were able to save. And it was not an individual effort. It was a team effort. Everybody was playing the position that they could play on the team. And I can think of a couple of people, names will ring something to you, and they're watching now. They're in the shape of what they're watching. Eric Guggen, a local businessman, and Dr. Eugene Foley, who was a local dentist, or down a dentist, and a guy that took x-rays of your teeth and everything else. And at the end of the year, when it was necessary, they would go to the bank and sign notes. 3 different guys, and we were able to keep it alive. And I remember the city came to me, and that was after Dan and all them guys moved on, and they said, what are you doing with that baseball down there? I said, well, baseball team in Jamestown. Well, we're having some complaints. And I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, Mr. Champion, a member of the city council, had people come to him and want to know what Diethrick was doing down there. And because he's taken a job down there, he's a general manager or something, and it's a job somebody else could do. Somebody else should have that job. So the mayor called me in the office and explained that to me, because I was working on full time for the city. And I said, well, okay, I understand that, but things will be all right. And we'll have to leave. He said, well, what do you think? Well, I said, well, good. I'm going to go out, and first thing I'm going to do tomorrow, I'm going to go buy a new car. He says, well, you know what? I said, I'm going to buy a new car so that I'll be able to do that now. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, at the end of the year, there's 3 guys putting their extra money in to keep the baseball team alive. I'm going to use my extra money to buy a new car. And he laughed about that, and about 3 weeks later, they got another telephone call. You better get yourself back down to the stadium. It's been a good place to be, and it's because of people around this room and people like Danny. And I can remember the best third baseman in the world playing third base at Lincoln School, and he sits across the table. And that's why he's called Whitey. Being a Cardinal fan, Whitey Korowski played third base for the Cardinals, so I changed his name to Whitey.
You're going back a long time.
That is a day or
When we
two.
were 12 years old.
That is a day.
I'll tell you a funny story, though, about the light towers at the stadium. Timmy, my son Tim, when we lived over on the north side of town, and a couple of other kids, would go down the stadium at night, because when they were out roaming around, and those 3 kids, my son and 2 other kids, climbed up those towers at night.
Oh, my.
With the thing. And one night they went down there and were climbing around. They went up into the press box. This is a true story. Started the record player up there, started the music and left. And the music was running when they left. True story. You asked Timmy about it. Boy, he suffered quite a bit after that, what he was doing down there.
But he climbed the ladder, and he said, so you're okay,
And he was about 13, 14, 15 years old at that time.
Just chronologically, baseball, had no baseball here in Jamestown, 74, 75, 76, and then you contacted the Montreal Expos, and that was that time period, and the same guy, Jim Fanning. Do you remember making the phone call and what Jim's reaction was?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask somebody else.
I don't know anybody else I can even ask. I'm just reading the book.
One of those times I was happy to pick the telephone, answered the telephone. We talked about that, and I guess it was the Pirates who left for that town. They left in mid-season, in fact.
Yeah.
And caught a 4th season. And we had a lot of people, like Greg has heard for a long time, the people I am, when are we going to get baseball back? When are we going to get baseball back? And so with his encouragement and knowing the gentleman that he was, the community got serious about it, and we were able to, pay the debt and pull it all together. Knowing that we're standing on the shoulders of Jim Fanning, it was a pretty good perch to be on, and so we with great confidence went forward. And the big key to that, and I remember when we had to go, you'd go out and we'd have a few people in the stadium. So I'd go out and look at the stadium, there'd be 250 people in there. I thought, oh my God, what a beautiful crowd! Where'd they all come from? And it went on and on and on. Pretty soon you go out and look, and of all the 5,000 seats, there's only 250 vacant seats. And that's an important thing in Jamestown, and that's the dream we're having now. And we're going to fill those seats.
Do you have a story about Jim you haven't told us yet? I mean, something a little bit other than how great he is, just to kind of personalize it. Did he take you out one night in Jamestown? There's got to be a story here we can tell, something that's going to put a laugh right there.
Too many of you guys know my wife. I'm not saying a word.
There we go. There's a quote.
I got a question.
Scott, have at it.
But on that, we used to go out every night after the ball game when he was in town or otherwise. Just as soon as the game was ended, we knew it was going to end. We ended up over to 10 pin.
Yeah.
And, that got to be the place for your meal, and it got to be the place to gather, and the umpires and everybody else would gather there. Bucky Capolita took a real interest in baseball and took an interest in what was going on. People like Mr. Fanning. And then when we weren't raising money, there was an opportunity, and it happened many times, where there would be an envelope come in the mail, and Bonnie Nelson was running the office at that time. It was open. It was from Montreal, and it was a cash check made out to several $1,000s sometimes, knowing that there was a cash flow problem in Jamestown, and of course they had a real interest in making the ball club work, and those kind of things went on and on and on.
He was, "Are you willing to go anywhere?" I said yes, and he said okay, and then like a general, he gave me a boom. Here's a game plan. You got to go to the winter meetings. You got to make a lot of calls in September, and the way you put it was get on your horse. And I'm glad I did that, because I got a job in Vermont in January of 17, which was the first Jamestown or the Expos franchise that Mr. Picor bought and moved over there. So I ran the ticket office for the first year over there, handled season tickets, handled many plans, fundraisers. Any kind of complaint about tickets, didn't matter whose fault it was, it came back to me. So I learned a lot about resilience in that box office. And then for the 18 season, I guess they kind of appreciated the fact that I got along with the Oakland people, who's an A's affiliate, and they moved me into a director of team operations role. So that meant I was booking the team travel, I was handling the player development contract, and just kind of took a few things off the GM's plate, which were very large things like hotels, buses, and the such. And once that wrapped up, I got another call from Danny in May of this year. I was working in part-time sales for the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, and he said you'd be a fool to not call these people in Jamestown, and I'm glad I did, because it's all led to this. Just very happy to be here. That's the long and short of it, eh? The guy from Canada. Just gonna stop at Horton's on the way here, bud, but drove right by her.
Hey, yeah. Hey. Did you ever talk about Jamestown? Do you have any corporate remembrance of that?
It's a good question. I've been asked a few times. I think what I would recall the most of Jamestown growing up would be whenever we would talk about certain players, and I would see the back of the card. I would always see, you'd see Jacksonville, Burlington, Iowa, whatever, you'd see Jamestown, and I thought it was in Florida, and I think there's one in North Dakota or something. There's a few Jamestowns. And I remember specifically asking my dad once, like, where is Jamestown? And he said it was in New York. My dad used to do a speech at the Schenectady Sports Banquet for quite a few years, 5 or 6 years in a row he would do that. And I don't know if he would come here at all. I know it's quite a ways away in the Tri-City there, but yeah, to try to be as direct as possible to answer that question, it would be the backs of cards. what I recall. And if my dad was talking about a player, and he would say, like, in conversation, yeah, we had you, where were you again? You were in Jamestown, you were in, so the name of the town came up a lot of times growing up. And it just became one of those towns I was familiar with as an Expos affiliate first, I would suppose, like Jacksonville and Quebec City. Before I even knew what the Carnival was, I knew that the team was the Carnivals. Like, before I was from Quebec and didn't know, I was all baseball growing up, so.
Did you ever talk about Dan?
It's funny because I think the first time we spoke was 2013 or 14 over the phone, because Danny got us, a buddy and I, Cubs tickets and Tigers tickets. And my dad was on the phone in his office, and it's at the house we're at now, my mother is at in London. So it had to have been 13 or later. And I went into his office and he said, "Here, Dan Lunetta's on the phone, thank him for the tickets." I was like, okay, and got on the phone and thanked you. And I remember the conversation was very quick, but thanked you for the tickets. And do you remember us meeting? Was I a child, a very little kid, or?
You?
Yeah.
Yes.
Baby, probably, right?
Oh, you were a youngin', for sure.
Yeah. But I mean, you were pretty busy for quite a few years.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah.
But I obviously heard your name a lot, and all of the Expos people of that period that were in that office, I heard a lot of those names. So your name was mentioned in our home often.
And
As a source of tickets, I can see this. That's nice. It means to an end,
I
yeah.
still owe them, actually, for those tickets.
And we've all taken advantage of it, let me just say.